Hello, everyone. We are super excited about a special interview. We are broadcasting live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch with a very special Indie Game Club episode. I am joined by two awesome folks, Tony and Richard of the game studio Far Few Giants. And Tony and Richard, I know you've seen some of our episodes before, so we have a tradition of clapping it up. So everybody I'm hoping is out there, including you all. Yes, let's make sure to clap it up. We're super excited. Keep this environment positive and welcoming. So I'm incredibly excited to have you all on the show. For those who are watching right now, you will recognize these two individuals are behind three of the games we recently covered on Indie Game Club. We talked about the Night Fisherman, the Outcast Lovers, and yesterday we talked about the Imagined Levithan. And we also, early on in one of those episodes, we also showed a teaser for one of the games you guys have worked on and are working on right now, Ring of Fire. So definitely check out those episodes if you have not seen those before. Those are currently on Facebook and YouTube, and we also broadcast on Twitch. So again, super excited to have you both. I have a million questions to ask you all, and I'm and as you guys saw with the streams and guests we had, we were really animated and excited to discuss and interpret and delve into these games, because I think what you all are doing is quite a bit different than the norm, right? I mean, we're used to the indie game space being more experimental, more of an opportunity to explore topics that may not fit kind of the mainstream kind of game model. But I think you guys take the narrative in a direction that's willing to confront topics that even the quirkiest publisher might be, in some cases, a little hesitant to handle. So at first I wanted to ask you guys about that. What inspired you? What created your love for games in the first place, and what kind of helped you guys establish this kind of brand of Far Few Giants? Because I think it's very clear now that when we see some of these games, I'm like, that's a Far Few Giants game.
Okay, there's several questions.
Yeah, there's a lot. You'll find that for me. It's a lot. I'm just throwing them out there.
Okay, the most interesting one to answer is probably something to do with why we make the kinds of games that we make.
Yeah.
So I guess anger, generally, or existential crisis, just ongoing, constantly boiling. The way that we got our start really was that Rich and I were both freelance in the games industry, and we bumped into each other at one of the industry events that we regularly go to down on the beach in Brighton, which is the south of England. And we were discussing the particulars, let's say, of some of the freelance work that we've been doing, and maybe that we've been not finding it that fulfilling. And so we just tried to decide what was the most unique thing, the most complete thing that only the two of us could accomplish. And that ended up, basically, we were looking at Mike Bithel's game, Subsurface Circular, in particular as inspiration. So that game, if you're familiar with it, is just a single, really well realized 3D scene with text that forms the majority of the gameplay, and it's like a bit of political intrigue. It's a fairly familiar robotic parable for race differences, essentially. But it had the spark in there that we looked at it as like, okay, so you can make one high production value looking scene, have all the gameplay be in text, which is cheap to produce because it's just text. But if you do it well, it can be really captivating.
Sure.
And when you're making something that small, it can be somewhat political. So that's kind of like half of it of why we decided to start making the types of games that we made, where they were very, very asset light, essentially, without too much fine detail to things. And most of our games have text as a primary part of the gameplay.
Sure.
And then the other half of it is just generally being frustrated with the state of the world.
Yeah.
And I'm this is coming at you from 2020, so I don't really need to tell anyone that the world is totally balked, and there's all sorts of problems with it. I'm more political than Richard is. Like when we first started working together, Richard, I think Richard was looking for someone that had things to say, and that was animated about things. And I was very animated. I did part of my degree in philosophy and then studied screenwriting. And then, I'm constantly reading about various injustices and making myself angrier. And then, like, for example, maybe we can talk about this in a bit more detail later, but the Night Fisherman was literally just a response that we made in a week at first to a tweet by a politician called Priti Patel in the UK, who was congratulating herself on closing our borders to all, like, everyone. This is before, well, it's not before coronavirus, but it was, closing the trade borders,
sure,
as well as immigration and like refugee borders and stuff. And they were congratulating themselves on this, and we were like, can I swear on this show?
Sure. I will say, this is we have our corporate sponsor here, but they're they're the best corporate sponsor you could ask for. They have they've never asked for one iota of editorial control. They love what we're doing. So go for it.
So well, the mood's left me now, but yeah, let's say we were very angry, and so we were like, right, what can we do that just basically puts up the middle finger to Priti Patel, and so we made the Night Fisherman.
Wow,
I think that answers the one part of your question.
Yeah, and as far as I guess delving a bit more into with you all doing your freelance work ahead before you all came together to form Far Few Giants, and we should say you guys are the primary forces behind Far Few Giants, but you do work with other people. I guess notably we should also mention Richard Campbell, whose information we put into the description, who provides all the music, from my understanding, which
all the audio generally, so including all the sound effects, the soundscapes, everything,
which are fantastic, which are absolutely fantastic. So shout out to Richard. Hopefully he gets the chance to see this, because I would love to even talk about that part a bit more as well. Richard, what were you all doing? What were the types of projects you all were working on before you all came together to form Far Few Giants?
Yeah. So I was working on primarily VR. At university I studied to be an animator, and my goal was to make animated short films, which you can kind of see the legacy of that in the Night Fisherman and some of our other games. It is trying very hard to be a short animated film, but with an element of interactivity and storytelling. I don't like animating a lot of dialogue, and so we tend to skim over that bit. And we were definitely inspired by things like Frog Detective, how they're quite simple in their animations. And we were looking to build a unique aesthetic that was very simple, mainly based upon silhouettes.
Yeah.
I want to treat a 3D engine kind of like Flash or Illustrator, like a vector editing tool. So I'm just working on the shapes rather than focused on the detailed textures. I'm thinking more about the colors and the composition of the game. So you can see that in the Night Fisherman and the Outcast Lovers, the character silhouettes are very, very simple. They don't have facial features. That's partially a restraint we give ourselves, a constraint we give ourselves, which is we don't have the time and budget to do complex animations. But you will see as well in Ring of Fire, we give our characters masks quite a lot. We kind of like how that has an air of mystique to them.
Absolutely.
As well. So I feel like my job primarily is just taking Tony's writing and making it presentable and commercial for the rest of the world. I have to make sure that the games look really quality and polished, and that the storefronts and stuff look like they're professional pieces of work.
Yeah.
So that when people encounter them, they take it seriously and don't just write it off as something that's like, oh, here's another art piece. It is actually something that is a quality game, as well as being like an interesting narrative.
Yeah, and I want to show. We're going to show trailers for all of the games we're discussing here in a moment, but I think you all nailed that piece where the game, not only because of its short length, you guys kind of, I don't know if you've coined this or not, but this coffee break type length game of 10 to 20 minutes, that's very approachable for anyone to pick up. But combining that with the visuals, the music, and the writing, it really creates this atmosphere where, like you said, it forces you to take it seriously immediately. And I think that's a really phenomenal job you guys have done, where you're in the zone immediately, you're taking it seriously, you're invested. And so let's explore that a little bit more. But if you don't mind, first, I want to show the trailer for the Night Fisherman from our friends here at Far Few Giants. So that was the trailer for the Night Fisherman, which was the first game I experienced of y'all's work. Could you guys give a bit of a description for those who are watching this for the first time? I can read the itch page, but I feel like it's better to come from your voice, Tony. Can you kind of give a brief description of what this game is about and how players experience it?
So, fundamentally, and this is something we've struggled with, it's a visual novel, which comes with a load of tags attached to it where people think of like itch.io, like hentai games.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not that. So it's a very cinematic 3D scene set on two boats at sea. You're playing a night fisherman who's out there minding his own business, and you're approached by another boat with a guy with the armed shotgun that you will have seen in the trailer on. The player is experiencing the dialogue, making choices for the fisherman to try and survive this encounter, plus other goals that become apparent later on. And you're also at the same time able to direct the scene. So we have a system by which you can actually change between the cinematic camera angles that we've set up. So if you want a shot to be close up in one character's face, you can do that. That's your choice. And that's it. Like, it basically comes, introduces mechanics, tells hopefully a powerful story, and then that's the end, and it doesn't last very long. It's 10 minutes.
Yeah. I meant to kind of ask you guys a bit earlier in terms of how far we want to go into spoiler territory or not. So I guess I'll ask you guys that first before we... what we said on the first episode of Indie Game Club where we covered this is we of course talked spoilers because it's kind of like a book club.
Yeah. We
talk about it, but we told people that even with the spoilers discussed, with the bite-sized kind of format of this, that we just feel like everybody should experience it, and that hearing the story doesn't necessarily spoil the experience, I guess, necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case with you all, but I'll leave it to you all. How far would you guys feel comfortable?
I think we should just talk about everything, because there's some particularly interesting things that we do hold back and that are supposed to hit you like a sledgehammer like halfway through the first one.
Yeah.
But it would be a shame not to talk about these things. So.
Yeah, I think when we have you all here as special guests, I love that. So everybody watching, spoiler alert. I would say still continue watch, like play these games for 100% sure. All of them, they're these short experiences that are absolutely amazing to experience. So as you said in this case. you are a night fisherman. Everybody who's seeing these visuals right now, Richard, like this is super striking immediately. Just seeing the color palette that was chosen here. I think your choice of using the kind of the silhouettes and the shadows on them and not having too much animation to them adds to the scene a lot. I know, obviously, as indie developers, there are some technical limitations and time and resource limitations in producing these, especially at the schedule you all are on, which we should say you all are doing one game a month, which I'd like to talk about as well. But as far as the striking color palette choice, was there what was kind of the reasoning behind that?
I think we should both talk about this.
Yeah.
Because this is something we butt heads over.
Interesting. Let's hear it.
Like not in a we butt heads in a constructive way.
Sure.
I think we're both necessary in this. But I push everything towards the weird and surreal. So in all the projects, Richard will show me like some colors, and I'll say, double it. Like I'll just go for something that's way weirder. Don't have a background at all. Just make it a single flat color and make the player imagine it in the Outcast Lovers. That kind of thing. And Richard's artist senses tend to react to that negatively at first, and then like it'll grumble. We're gonna say all this shit while his mic's muted. It'll grumble, and then do it, and then say it's not very good, and then undo it, and then go back to it later and like, actually, yeah, this is the best version of this. The same thing with Imagined Levithan and the black and white. Like, we had a lot of conversations where I was insisting that like the floor and the fog and the sky and everything had to be just pure white, no texture on the ground, nothing. This comes from a place of realizing that we're making a game every month. We're 2 people plus extras, so we're not going to be able to compete with the visual stylings of Ghost of Tsushima, and we're not going to be able to make anything that's traditionally stunning in that way. So the best thing we can do is like be bold, use color based like storytelling, and the extra thing that I'm fascinated by is when you remove detail from a piece of art, it doesn't necessarily go missing because the player still imagines it in their head. So like you specifically mentioned the point about characters' faces, and Richard was talking about masks before. Yeah. And it's not just because of technical limitation that we put masks on people's faces or shadow them or just leave it featureless. It's because when you're reading that dialogue, and if I've made sure the dialogue is very textured and communicates to you exactly how that person is feeling and how their should be animated, you don't actually need to see the animations. Like, you fill that in your head with something that is way better, realistically, than we could produce for the entire game, game's length within a month. Or even if we had probably a year, like, you're going to be imagining better things, particularly in the Night Fisherman where it's in shade. And the same for environments, like the background of the house in Outcast Lovers, like behind... I forgot my own character's name. Behind Mary.
Mary, when Mary with the window in the background. Yep.
Yeah, so Ola's got the window in the background, and Mary's.
Oh yeah, Ola. Yeah, exactly.
And but on Mary's side, it's just like a purple background with a couple bits of furniture that are floating in a void. But I feel like players don't generally notice that. Like, you're imagining the whole space there, in theory. Anyway, I'll shut up because it's an art question.
Yeah, Richard, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I do want to give a quick shout out. Coinmonger, thanks so much for the bits. Hey, Layla, who was a guest yesterday, thanks so much for sharing and liking the stream. Really appreciate y'all there. Thanks so much. Yeah, Richard, so yeah, this being an art question, what are your thoughts on this? I'm loving hearing kind of this inside information into the process.
So originally when we made The Night Fisherman, we made it in a week. We produced 6 games. Was it between 6 or 8 games? 6 games in 6 weeks.
Wow.
At the very start of the year, and so we are now gradually like working through them and releasing them over a month. But that came with even bigger limitations than you would find typically in our games. So the Night Fisherman, the reason it is so minimal is we really only had time to put in the sky, the ocean, a couple boats, a couple characters. There's like a quarter of the amount of content as there is in even the Outcast Lovers, which feels kind of minimal on its own. So I tend to just pull in a bunch of different assets, like Unity assets that I have at the start. So I would pull in a pre-made ocean shader, a pre-made skybox, and then I'd tailor it to how I want. So I may go in and replace every single texture. I may hack apart the shader and completely rewrite it, or I may leave it roughly as it was, depending on how much time I have. And then I have my own cell shader. So cell is just kind of like cartoon anime style shader that I use on everything, which gives me that nice edge highlighting and harsh solid shadows.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the bulk of it. But I kind of get halfway through the week. I have a combination of a whole bunch of different random cobbled together assets, and then I go to Tony. I'm like, "Why does it look like balls?" And he's like, "Well, have you gone to Pinterest yet?" It's like, "No, I've been avoiding it. I don't want to go on Pinterest because I'll get sucked into it for a day." It's like, "Right, I'm going to give you a limit of an hour. Put together a Pinterest board, find all the best inspiration you can find relating to this topic, pull them together, and send me your top 3 images as inspiration." And then what I try to do is just borrow ideas from those images and merge them with the assets and 3D models and shaders I already have to create something that is artistically unique and like technically achievable. So actually, if you were to Google the Night Fisherman, there is a piece of concept art that I didn't make that I just stumbled across during my research process that has almost the exact same color palette. by I don't know whether it's by accident or not, but it was definitely on my inspiration board. And it showed up in a couple of the YouTube thumbnails that we didn't create. So that was the Night Fisherman.
There's other interesting stuff about that though. Like, I think I made this point recently on our podcast, but I see the way that AAA studios tend to make things, or even like big indies who are working on like multi-year projects for $500,000 or whatever, like they will create absolutely everything they can from scratch. And it's more like it's kind of like a classical orchestra or something, where everybody is writing, or the one person at least is writing completely original music, and then they're going and they're getting people to record a completely original recording of that performance, capturing it, and then that's what they're selling. So everything there is like completely original. Whereas what we do is more like how hip-hop music gets made. So we're just sampling, basically. We take like an asset pack from one place, a shader from another, a color palette from some concept art, whatever, like, structural inspiration from a film or something, and we're just slapping these things together in a way that creates new meaning. And most of the time, none of those individual things, unless it's been done very intentionally, is like wholly reproduced or even identifiable in the final product. So like in the Imagined Levithan, there's a boat model that's in there, that's in the tutorial area, and that's like a standard boat model that Richard got from Sketchfab or something, right?
Gotcha.
But the work in it was Richard customizing the
snow layered on top of it.
Snow layered on top, and the black and white palette and how that would work, and work that was done months or years ago, customizing this what began as a standard flat kit shader asset that Richard's now using to create the cell shaded look. So it's a very scrappy and I think modern way of working. It's not the dream of the auteur perfect creator who just sits there and squirrels away and creates everything from scratch.
Yeah, and we have a couple comments here. Some of them I'm gonna get to at different times, just based on the structure of the conversation here. Amar, I see your question about Outcast Lovers, and so I will make sure that when we get to the section on Outcast Lovers that we will get to that. Tempest636, who is also a guest and is a big fan of your work, wrote, "If you think about it, nothing is fully original anymore. They all take some kind of elements here and there from other media, but the final product does have new meaning and originality in its full package." Yeah, absolutely, Tempest. Thanks for that. Coinmonger asked whether the dialogue was written or spoken. It is written. Is that something... obviously with any of these things, there's production costs and times and resources, but I think there's something powerful about the fact in this case that it is actually written. So I wonder if you all, had unlimited money, whether you would actually make the choice of going with recorded dialogue or whether you prefer written for that reason of what you said, the mind filling in the blanks and kind of personalizing it in that way. What are y'all thoughts on that element?
Yeah, I definitely prefer written text. I wouldn't say that I wholly enjoy playing every written game. Sometimes I find them a little bit exhausting, especially if they're paragraph heavy rather than short, snappy sentences. But the way I kind of see it, our games are like a book, but more accessible to the new generation because there's interesting visuals, because it's got a level of interaction. It's much more approachable, and I think a good example of that is White Ocean Big Jacket, which we took a lot of inspiration from.
Yeah, I was right about to mention that. Yeah.
Although their design is a little bit different. It's closer to, say, old-fashioned cinema before they had voice, where they would have your text cards, and then you'd have your visuals, and then they
separated,
contrast.
Yep.
And they play off of each other. Yeah. Whereas we're kind of acting them out both at the same time as interactive subtitles. But definitely, one thing you don't realize is that reading text is a mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't have a lot of time for building a lot of mechanics, having text that is interesting to read, engaging, makes you think, and gives you engaging choices. That can sometimes be enough.
Yeah, I think it's easier to write intriguing text than it is to be read, than it is to write intriguing text to be listened to. Listening to just feels more passive. You're less having to concentrate. It's very easy to just kind of fade away and not be concentrating on what's going on. You just kind of allow the story to happen. Whereas at least with reading, it's more active. You're having to actually use your eyes to look at every single word, and for most people, say it out loud in their head. And then there is the point about the imaginary acting that happens being more powerful than what we could achieve with unlimited budget. I definitely try it. It would be something that we'd experiment with.
And we should say in your latest game, the Imagined Levithan, there is a voice, and in fact, it's your voice actually.
It's my voice. Yeah.
For those who are listening and doing a double take, yes, when you're hearing that godly narrator voice coming in,
So that's just me trying to insert myself into the game as a god, but no, not really. It suited Imagined Levithan better because the content is more poetic and is less having to sell you on some emotional state in the voice. So, and I used to teach poetry. I used to be an English teacher, so I kind of got some practice at doing that. So I was more comfortable doing it, but narrating the Night Fisherman or Outcast Lovers, I don't know. I don't feel like I would have been up to the challenge of voice acting it.
Right.
Rich is just shaking his head very sullenly, like
It's
no,
tricky
absolutely
too
not.
because it's a different context, right? Like, and we'll get to these trailers too because I know the audience might have a little trouble keeping up with all the different games we're talking about. But I guess the tricky difference is with the Imagined Leviathan, you're kind of this outside narrator speaking onto the experience versus a kind of a tense dialogue between different individuals in the Night Fisherman or even in the Outcast Lovers within a loving relationship, right? But still a tense situation. So I'd imagine it's a whole different style of kind of like acting and production involved in that as well.
Yeah, there's a couple aspects to it. Like, I have tried doing voiceover in game jams before, but what we found is that, like, for our scale and our budget, we can't necessarily get the time with the actors or get the right actors to portray the emotions that we're dealing with, and quite often we're dealing with really heavy emotions.
Yes.
So I don't feel like we can do that justice at our scale, and I don't want to do it wrong. So I'd rather just leave voice out and let people interpret it in the way that they feel is right.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One more technical question we have here before I also want to bring in the Outcast Lovers trailer so we can maybe talk Outcast Lovers and Night Fisherman together. But Coinmonger is asking keyframe animation or mocap or both. Can I think I love the question, Coinmonger. I think it's assuming we have access. I'm sure these guys are loving access to motion capture. That would be awesome, right?
It was really strange. In my previous jobs and companies, we've always had access to high quality motion capture, whether that was like a cheap little suit, like a perception neuron or something, which would cost you a few thousand, or whether it would be like a full animation stage. I am trained as a motion capture animator.
That's awesome.
But we don't have a lot of time. So what I end up doing instead is grabbing a whole bunch of not very good animations from Mixamo and then trying to mash them together on a timeline in Unity with a whole bunch of different tools that like control their head direction. You can mask different limbs, so you can have just a left or right arm animating, for example, or just a head, and combine them all at runtime and pray to the gods it doesn't fall over on itself.
Yeah.
If we do come back to it next year and do like a polished update, I would love to hand animate a lot of those motions, but it's just time. Like I spend so much time building the artwork out for the scene to make one good looking screenshot that what it actually looks like in motion tends to kind of fall by the wayside.
Yeah, and Coinmonger's following up with another question. Thank you so much, Coinmonger, and everyone for throwing in these questions and comments. We really appreciate it. Coinmonger's saying, does Unity have good animation tools? I guess we should clarify. I did do a little background reading, and this is in Unity, but for those watching, would you say Unity has good animation tools for the work you're trying to pull off here?
Good enough, let's say. Could be better. I think Unity's tools have a long way to go, but it better than nothing.
Gotcha. And we should also give a shout out to NGT Queen and Sheila Fung for following. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Yes, Coinmonger's laughing a bit about Unity there. So let's I want to dive a bit more into the politics of the world of Night Fisherman, but I also feel like it's worthwhile to see Outcast Lovers so we can talk about them together and separately, but seeing them both I think makes a lot of sense. So if you all don't mind, the next trailer we are going to watch right here is the Outcast Lovers, again from our friends here at Far Few Giants. So that was the trailer for the Outcast Lovers, and again, we have a couple thoughts here in our chat that we will get to momentarily. But a couple quick things, I guess here. You guys saw the episode where we covered this. Some of us weren't immediately clear at first the relationship between the Outcast Lovers and the Night Fisherman. I was curious to hear directly from you all. Was that intentional to some extent, that you guys didn't like outwardly say that this game is directly connected to this game? I wasn't sure what you all were going for there, but if you guys don't mind going into that and then maybe talking a bit about those connections and what you're kind of going here with this narrative.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you analyzed it, I think. You were suggesting that the games were designed to be played separately and to be played in any order, and they are. As that's part of us building 12 games in a year.
Yeah.
Is we want every game, even if they're part of a sequence or part of an anthology, that they would be they would have a life on their own, and they could be played on their own merits, and then you could discover other works in the collection.
I think we can be more frank than that. I think we can be like okay. So maybe this will come up further on in the interview, but we're trying to do this thing where, because we are indie and we can just reveal everything, we should. So honestly, the reason why that is in place is because it is important to us that we are a bit trying to build a brand to make ourselves able to do this long term. Otherwise, if you don't make money at any point, then we will just starve. Honestly, when you look at the stats for sequels of games, it's a tail off. So like when you play, if you look at the number of people who played Banner Saga 1 versus Banner Saga 2 versus Banner Saga 3, it's going to be a fall off, particularly with like episodic releases. Loads of people will start a season of episodic things and then not play the final parts. So it was just built into the conception of this whole project that each part had to be completely standalone, enjoyable on its own, and it could be basically an onboarding point. So you could then go and discover the other parts. That it's not entirely artistically bankrupt. Part of the reason I wanted to work in that structure was because of this graphic novel called Day Tripper that is structured in that way, where it's one graphic novel, but it's like a bunch of different alternate timelines in the guy's life, so it doesn't matter where in the graphic novel you start. But the honest reason is just like a practical one of we want to be able to onboard people at any point into playing our games.
We have no control over how Steam algorithms work. They could at one point just pick up the third game in the series or whatever, and then push that up to hundreds of thousands of downloads, and that would be great for us. But the game would need to support it. And a lot of the feedback we get from speaking to publishers about creating serial content, which is what we want to do, we want to continue to do, is that it's really, really difficult to publish games in a sequence at different times. Like you'll see the way Don't Nod are releasing a game, I don't know what it is, every week or every month recently. That is one of the hardest ways to do it, because you have to maintain that excitement for months on end, which is a mammoth marketing task. So we're trying to find a different way around that problem.
I really love that. Sorry, keep going, Richard.
And we are looking into how to do shared save games, but we don't know how to do it yet. Because
that's something we talked about in the episode as well, and kind of made me wonder. It's one of those like kind of gamer mind things where if there's not a shared save file, then it kind of makes you think about whether your choices are maintained throughout. Real quick, a couple things from the chat here. Tony, Did you say that the graphic novel was Day Tripper? Or
Day Tripper.
Day Tripper, Amar. And Amar, I see you as well as Tempest. And hey, Madam Fun Size, thank you all for jumping in here. A lot of folks who are lovers of y'all's content, and please keep those questions coming in. If I don't get to them immediately, know that I promise I will get to all of those questions. It's just I'm trying to slide them in nice and in a nice and subtle way. Amar sending his love and saying thanks for this. So yeah, a couple thoughts there. I love what you said about that in terms of like being able to experience the content in different ways. And it's interesting when you said that whole kind of tail off thing, because we have had instances where like certain major explosions of popularity, something like a Breaking Bad, for example, kind of almost had the opposite effect, where it kind of shot up once people were able to digest it Okay. I didn't know that. Let's open it up. Go for it. Tell me your thoughts on that.
So yes, Breaking Bad became lots more successful after its first season. It wasn't.
I think like season 3, right, is when it got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when people discover it later on because other people are telling them, "Holy crap, I'm on season 3 and it's incredible."
Sure.
They don't start from season 3. They start from season 1.
Great point.
So like the viewership stats, and the same with the Banner Saga thing, where it will almost always, except in the case of weird things like Call of Duty franchise or something where it's like completely not connected, it will almost always in heavily narrative content be that your first episode has to have the highest viewership stats, and then it tails down from then. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the success of subsequent episodes can't get the franchise generally so much popularity that the start episode grows again. But yeah, you still do get a tail off. So the idea was just to basically nip all of that in the bud and not have to think about it, and just make it so that you can get on at any point. And what we're trying to add in time for the next chapter is, as Richard said, this shared save file, so that not only will your choices carry forwards, but I really want to make it so your choices carry backwards. So that there's things that you can do in like future episodes, which may change some single line or a single asset in a previous one, so that if you play them out of our release order, it's almost like it was foreshadowing the choice that you later made.
I love that idea. Will the player be aware of that? Is this going to be something like a telltale thing? I see Richard against. Okay.
No, I hate that. I hate that.
Yeah.
we try to hide everything as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it gives you some surprise.
Like when I watch playthroughs on YouTube and stuff, if people are finishing the game and asking out loud, I wonder if my choice is being remembered, then I've done the job correctly.
Yeah.
Because I want people to be thinking about that, basically, and whether what they chose even mattered, because I think it's both like material concern of like they're aware they're playing a video game and they don't know whether that box got ticked in the file, but also I think people are also asking themselves, did that even matter, full stop, like ethically or whatever. And
it's a slippery slope once you start doing things. Like Amar is saying in the chat, Clementine remembers this, like a Walking Dead reference there. It's one of those things that once you've kind of taught the players, you've conditioned them to that when these moments happen, then if there aren't those moments, then you almost feel like, oh, okay, well, that truly doesn't matter. And so I like what you all are doing on that. I promised I was going to keep this structured, but I'm immediately throwing those rules out and jumping ahead here because of what you just said. With this approach you all took, when I was playing Ring of Fire, I don't know why, but I immediately was thinking of a show that was one of my favorite shows of last year, which was Too Old to Die Young from Nicholas Winding Refn. I don't know if you all are familiar with him. He is
familiar with his work, but I've not seen that.
Yeah, he's for those in the audience, he's probably most famous for Drive, being his most kind of most accessible, I guess, movie that's been most widely seen. But he's done a wide variety of things.
Portrayal of Heartman in Death Stranding as well.
Yes, exactly. Yes, absolutely. You're right about that. But one thing that strikes me about that, it sounds like maybe that wasn't any sort of inspiration there, but one thing interesting about his style there is when he released Too Old to Die Young, which is available on Amazon, he released it specifically with the idea that you can watch any sort of episode in any sort of order. And he kind of stated some similar points to what you did. Now, I don't necessarily think... I think if you know his personality, I think that was more kind of a bit of a little marketing kind of element there, a little bit of hyperbolic elements, but I think that's worth mentioning here. All right, well, let's get to some of these questions here that reference Outcast Lovers, just because I want to make sure I'm not getting that. So one that Amar and Jordan were discussing was Outcast Lovers really in a small town? We came to that conclusion that both of them loved in a small town based on the newspaper featuring the story and writing about hero doctor coming home being headline of that newspaper. It was either intentional or me and Jordan were reaching too far into the theme. Any thoughts about that in terms of like the setting and those elements there?
Yeah, it's 100% intentional. With so few things actually included,
yes,
like in the whole game generally, whether it's visual assets or whatever, like if something is present in the writing or in a visual asset, like it is intended to communicate something highly specific that we felt was important. So generally speaking, like literally everything you're seeing or experiencing in those games, like there is, if it makes you think something, that is 100% us trying to get that across, generally speaking.
Love it. And Amar is sending his hearts over. He's excited about this. And Jono really is saying, ooh, we're getting some extra lore. I love it. Richard, you were saying?
I was going to say, I think the only counter to that is one of your players on your stream encountered a bug where the boy was spinning in a circle. And we only saw that come up. We only saw that come up on YouTube videos because there's an animation bug where if you leave the game running for 5 minutes or longer, it just very gradually rotates on the spot. And mostly YouTubers come across that because they spend a long time setting up their recording systems.
And they just leave it on.
But we didn't catch it during playtesting.
Yeah.
That's the only non-intentional thing. Otherwise, everything is pretty much intentional.
Why did you have to tell them that? Why couldn't you just have it be that the boy is supposed to rotate through the back of the boat? And that has some transcendental physical.
There's a similar thing in Ring of Fire where Grosvenor will just sink through the bottom of the car over many, many minutes.
Okay, I love that. I'll have to check those out again. But maybe a future achievement.
But generally, like if it's in the game, it has purpose and meaning. Otherwise, it would have been cut. The funny origin to the Night Fisherman was that I really wanted to make a fishing game. I love fishing mini games.
Do you remember what the name was?
It's like Beauty Ripper.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched some YouTube video where some guys were like pretending to be Australian fishermen playing a Wii fishing game, and they just kept screaming Beauty Ripper at each other while they were overacting, pretending to fish, and like chugging cans of beer. So I like wanted to capture that feeling. And we have this when we're designing, we spend a whole day just outlining ideas on a whiteboard. So we will throw out a bunch of disparate ideas around a topic. I think this one was just random because it was the last one of the season. And we combined Tony's idea. He wanted to recreate Inglourious Bastards in a narrative game.
Oh man, did you guys see when Amar mentioned that being one of his favorite movies? Yeah. This conversation was destined, folks. Indie Game Club and Far Few Giants. This was destined to happen. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? On the Inglourious Bastards connection? Amar, I'm sure, is going to be sending some messages soon with his.
It's a pretty clear comparison. There's a few people in Steam reviews that like pulled up Tony's script and pulled up the Inglourious Bastards script and compared them line by line. And
there's a lot of doctors like, this dev has It's just ripped off Quentin Tarantino tastelessly. So this is bereft of all value and completely missing the fact that it's like, okay, so ask yourself why we did that.
Yes.
And then there's like an additional layer of meaning. The idea was basically that scene is perfect and probably, in my opinion, the best scene of any film ever. As far as I've seen, and I've seen, I guess I've seen quite a lot of films, but it's just perfect, and I love it, and it's burned into my brain, and but I really resonate with it, honestly. And this goes into a lot of the reason, the moral stuff kind of behind the Night Fisherman, and the world that those games are set in, because I really, really feel like I understand that situation, because I'm quite a principled, like, moralistic person. Like, I'm the type that, like, when I see somebody needs help or whatever, like, I will always dive in, for better or worse. Sometimes I'm just sticking my nose in where it's not actually needed. But I can't help it. I will just try and be a hero when it's not appreciated. And it means that quite often, like in the UK, you'll hear, racism or xenophobia. And a lot of the time, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And these days in this country, it is the dominant culture, as it is in America. Like, the KKK's president is in power. In the UK, it is, Farage and the UKIP people or the BNP supporters and the Islamophobes won. Like, Brexit has happened, like our prime minister is on record calling Muslim women letterboxes and things like that. So that is the dominant culture, and I feel like the farmer, Monsieur Lapetit, in the scene from Inglourious Bastards, he's in a situation where the dominant culture, represented by Hans Lander and the SS, are subjugating people around him, but he can't do anything about it. He can't fight because he just died. He can't, like, I can't go out and just, like, fight racists in the street because I'd get arrested and, like, it would tank, like, whatever other life or career opportunities I had. So, and also it's just not that black and white, because it's just the dominant culture. It's not like individual targets. I'm not going to be able to just go out and punch Richard Spencer. So I think the choice that the farmer makes, where he can try and shield people, but fundamentally his choice only comes down to, do I sacrifice myself for basically no gain, just to show solidarity with people, or do I capitulate and let the fascists into my home and tell them where the people are and all that kind of stuff? That choice, I feel like, is something that we make basically every day in the UK, and probably in the US as well, for anyone who, I don't know, has the same political leanings as I do. There's always a choice to be made about whether you actually, like, stand up and scream about the horrible, horrible shit that's going on around the world, that millions of people in concentration camps in the Uyghur region of China right now, for example, or do you just go along with your life and, like, play video games? So anyway,
I think
so that's where it comes from, right? Like,
yeah.
That's why I wanted to recontextualize that scene in the modern day, in the English Channel, in response to Priti Patel's tweet, because I felt like the farmer, and I felt like 1-2% of the anguish that character is feeling in that scene, because there's really nothing that you can do. Like, yes, you can go out and vote, and everyone should go out and vote, but at the same time, in this country, Rupert Murdoch's prime minister has won every election since the 80s. Like it's bought and paid for. So anyway, I'll stop talking because you both look very serious.
No, I mean, I think that's, no, this isn't any surprise. I think for anybody who's played these games or knows about them, this is what we would expect exactly. So it's important for us to understand this kind of like foundation on which this is built. A couple things before we dig into that. I do want to mention a couple things here. Amar says, to be fair, being in a game put me more into that chair as the fisherman than watching the farmer do it. John O'Reilly says, yeah, if it isn't the best, it's certainly up there. And Amar saying, same with Outcast Lovers, we all want to help, but raising a child is a different moral life choice. So there's a lot to unpack here. Richard, I think you were wanting to jump in.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the first one is the choice you make at the end of the Night Fisherman. There's a lot of confusion about that. Especially,
can you elaborate for those who aren't familiar with that choice?
I'm not sure I can do it justice.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so the choice you have basically is, for anyone who's not played it, the Night Fisherman is not really a Night Fisherman. That's a cover, and in the back of his boat, he has a immigrant child who he's transporting from Calais in France, and the guy with the gun has already clocked this and figured it out, and basically says, "I know you've got somebody under there." He has the shotgun in hand and says, you can either take the rope and go into the water, in which case you'll live. Well, he doesn't phrase it like that. He tells you to do that. And then your choice is either to follow along with what you were being told to do and allow presumably a horrible thing to happen to the child, or to show solidarity with the child and try and comfort them and protect them. But either way, the Churchill, the guy from the EPG, which is the fictional racist group, I say fictional, but barely fictional racist group that's, the guy with the gun, he shoots the boat through regardless, and the kid is in the water. Your character either is like dragged out of the water by him, or just gets shot when the boat gets shot, if you just choose to stay in. So that's the situation anyway. You don't really change the child's fate. It's about what you should do when you can't affect real change, whether you still should act in a way that's like morally consistent with your values. Anyway, Richard was going to say something about the choice.
Yeah, no, thanks for setting up the context. Richard?
We saw a lot of confusion around the choice, especially there was a lot of like YouTubers who played it, and they were like, there is no good ending, and that threw them. Like, they expect when they play narrative games like your Telltale games or David Cage's games, they expect to get a good ending, a bad ending, and like a neutral ending or whatever. And in this one, there are only two bad endings, and I think that threw a lot of people. And that is the point. Like, the point of the story is that in some situations, you just cannot have a good ending where everyone survives and everyone is happy. Like, specifically in this situation, you can only make a choice about what happens to yourself. Is that right, Tony?
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting. One of the things we talked about yesterday was kind of expectations going into games. This whole idea of like, how much should you know about a game ahead of time, watching a trailer, reading up on it, or going into it blind. And some of that depends, obviously, somewhat, I guess, on the length of the content as well, for kind of the expectation of what people are going to be involved in. Can you talk a bit about the reaction this game has received? I guess both not only on the narrative front, but also mechanically, because even in our early conversation, there was some people were like, well, the visual novel game. I think you guys saw my kind of opinion on this is the term game, I think, is a long spectrum, and I love this whole kind of minimalist interactivity, even from changing camera angles and making dialogue choices to maximum activity. And so what's been the reaction to the gameplay as well as the narrative that you guys have seen?
Can Can I ask a question first?
Yes, please.
Did you know what did you know about the game going in? Did you just observe it on its face value of what there is on the store page and the trailer, which is kept quite vague, or did you hear about it through someone else and you were told that there was a deeper level to it?
So traditionally, I'm the kind of individual that's lurking on every website, Indie Games Plus, like every indie website imaginable to try to get, score my next fix, so to speak. And I honestly can't quite remember. As you know, we're covering so many games that I can't remember quite the first time. Sorry about that. Quite the first time I had heard about it. I want to say it was either Indie Games Plus or it was through the just like scoping through the racial justice bundle, but I had not watched anything about it ahead of time, or I only read the basic description because I wanted to go into it blind, and I didn't know explicitly the relationship between Night Fisherman or Outcast Lovers. Is there a reason you asked that?
Yeah, because we struggle with that all the time. Like we want our games to be approachable, so there's a balance, but there's a fine line between being explicit about what the content is, and about making the game appear as something that a Steam gamer would enjoy. Say, for example, a fishing game, and then throwing them completely for a loop and giving them something that they don't expect but might enjoy in a different way.
Yeah.
The reaction has generally been positive. I think both games, I did a bunch of stats the other day, and both games average about an 80% user score across a bunch of platforms.
That's great.
It's been somewhat made more negative. It was higher than that, but we got brigaded by 4chan because of the political content. Which, honestly, like, they have to play the game to review it, so like, good.
We fully expected that going into Steam.
Yeah.
Like, we know that itch is very open to this sort of content, and when we applied to join Steam with our games, we knew that we were going up against a brick wall essentially, and we've come across it pretty well. Like, the Night Fisherman's done pretty well.
But people have generally been really positive about it. I feel like more so than other games that we look at that are in the same scale, we get polarizing views. So it's either people coming on and saying this is leftist propaganda, or this is just Inglourious Bastards, and there's no reason why you should have recontextualized this, or that kind of thing. It'll be very negative, or they'll be like screenshotting Richard's tweets and then like calling him out for like shaming reviews or something. And then but then we have really positive stuff where people are just like, probably if they already agree with the game's politics, but people find it very, very affecting, very moving. And also we've had a reasonable number of people who have like reached out or written reviews or joined our Discord to talk to us or whatever, who have immigrant experiences or have experienced British nationalist racism, that appreciate what we're doing. We've not had, we kind of considered that maybe we would have people who do have those experiences, but that were going to come at us and be like, who are these white boys? But that hasn't happened, I think, which means we probably did a good enough job. But at the end of the day, like, we're just making stuff that feels true, and we have very little budget, so we can't necessarily like go and hire loads of people that are not ourselves. We've only got ourselves to make the stuff. So
I think it's important, Tony, that we say, like, we have sensitivity readers that we work with. We have our Discord members, we have mentors, and they all work together to make sure that the stuff we're putting out is authentic and it is meaningful.
That's an excellent point.
There's a thing that's more interesting, I think, that's further than that, which is that we pitch the stories to ourselves that we are equipped to tell. So you'll notice so far that you don't play as the refugee boy
Yes.
in either Night Fisherman or the Outcast Lovers, and that's because we're not refugees. We can't tell necessarily the texture of his story, but what we can talk about is the experience of being a British person and seeing this inhumanity occur and wanting and needing to respond to it. So we definitely can talk about those things, which is what we choose to. And that includes, depicting and writing characters who have experiences different than our own. But I feel like we're not telling their stories for them. We're telling stories about British people responding to their existence, which is its whole other separate thing that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. And I think people hearing you all say that, I think it shows also an appreciation for the fact that these things these aren't just kind of like window dressing or like sensational backdrops in which to set stories, right? We kind of see that oftentimes is the case. I mean, somewhat, I guess you could say, like with how some of the AAAs, like maybe Ubisoft kind of flirts with like the political or something as like a backdrop to just dip their toes in order
you can
to
storm Washington and the White House in this game, but it's not political.
Yeah, exactly, stuff like that. Or even Deus Ex, I guess, with their kind of cybernetic apartheid kind of component, I think is worth mentioning there. How about to the question as far as defining this as a game or not? I know you haven't answered that directly, but Richard, you kind of talked about when you were talking about the production of it, you said this kind of even started off in your mind kind of almost as like an animation, like a animated story, so to speak. I don't know if I'm referencing that correctly, but I don't know if that helps us answer that question or not.
So I mean, as long as I was working in VR, which was like 4 years, we were always doing linear narrative content where you had no control over the gameplay at all, and that was, I guess, primarily like a production cost thing. We wanted to produce the highest quality work, and the more you branch the story, the more you're limiting yourself in terms of how much polish you can put on each element. So a couple of the big projects we released one was called Abe, which is now getting a re-release, and maybe even a film, and that was written and created by Rob McClellan, and we created the VR port for it. Another one was Dispatch, which came out on all the Oculus devices. It was published by Oculus themselves as part of Story Studios, which was quite a prestigious group at the time. And I definitely recommend checking out Dispatch.
Yeah, it looked amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. That's on YouTube, and it's about 20 minutes long. It's like 4 episodes. I think it started originally as 5, and it's stark black and white wireframe narrative, animated narrative about what is it to be a 909 dispatch caller, and to be hearing someone in a moment of panic, and to be responding to them and being sort of their only source of comfort. So it's kind of a combination of that, but also kind of a like a murder mystery kind of true crime story combined. So I definitely took a lot from that in terms of how we were constructing these stories. And straight off the bat, I wanted to make animated short films in game engines, because, and you've seen this in the recent times, like Pixar and everyone is now working in game engines. They've built their own game engines for rendering because it's so efficient for lighting and rendering. I was like very much at the forefront of pushing the way that people are making animations in real time. And I pitched a couple short film ideas to Tony. Tony pitched a couple back. We went through pre-production on that. And then we kind of we settled on Ring of Fire, which is it's a digital adaptation of the board game Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
You got to my question. I knew that was the case. Okay. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that, because that's what.
So
upcoming question.
So we played. Me and my friends had played Consulting Detective for like 6 months, and that each case you play is pretty epic. It's like it takes about 3 to 6 hours over an evening, and you're so exhausted while you're going through it that like you kind of take turns in who's leading the investigation, and who's taking notes, and who's looking in the telephone directory and stuff. It is mentally engrossing, and I really recommend you watch the Shut Up and Sit Down YouTube review of it, because I think that's really well produced. And I remember at some point I might have been listening to a podcast, I think with Sean Bannerman or one of those guys, and they were like, folks. Idle Thumbs, and they were like, I really want to see a Consulting Detective game made by Campo Santo, made by the guys who wrote The Walking Dead and Firewatch. And I was like, I really want to see that too. So I started working with my friend, who's a programmer, on making, just at the time, like, I wanted to make a companion to Consulting Detective that was an app that you could just type in your search result into, and it give you the results you wanted. And then I brought the idea to Tony, and we were like, should we make this a full game? And you were totally into it. And we spent a long time on pre-production for that. We did reams and reams of concept art. We built a whole prototype. We spent about 2 years pitching it to publishers. And the way we had implemented at the time was all keyboard and mouse based. So you had to physically type into a search bar the results to get your results, kind of like your Google search or whatever. It's most similar to Her Story or Hypnospace Outlaw.
I should also recommend to you all, I don't know if you actually saw, but 2 weeks we did a developer interview with Tim Scheinman, who's based out of Brighton in the UK, and he developed a game recently that you can find on itch called Family. And he's doing a follow-up, and it's an excellent game that he's kind of pulling on that whole moniker, like an Ober-like game, referencing Lucas Pope's Return of the Obra Dinn and Papers, Please. So that's worth mentioning. I can show the Ring of Fire now. I know we're kind of flipping around here a bit. I don't know if that would help. I also was thinking you guys might be inspired, but I think you were developing this beforehand, but like games like Chronicles of Crime or Detective on the board game front, if you haven't seen those before, those employ kind of a digital component as well. And Potions and Pixels is equal lovers of board games as we are video games. So we love seeing that. Maybe before we get to Ring of Fire, so just to kind of go back a bit, when somebody talks to you guys about like the definition of game or not, Richard, it sounds like you're not too fixated on that and you don't really care. Is that a fair statement?
I found it quite frustrating when you guys were discussing this in your show.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, tell me about it. What was frustrating about it?
No interest in talking about it.
I hate that question because it's only ever semantics. And I came to the conclusion when I was studying philosophy that if you try and define anything, you can always argue your way out of any definition, because there just are no actual hard and fast definitions for things. Like the dictionary way of thinking about things, where a word or a concept means precisely just this one thing and no other things additionally, just doesn't exist. So like, yeah,
I hear you. I majored in philosophy as well, and I can't remember who, but the philosopher that one of his more recent works, or recent meaning with the last 50 years or so, was looking at the definition of games and like sports and like what fit.
Yeah, I studied the exact same thing.
Yeah, what definition? I hear you on that.
So for me, like, if it's treated as a game, if it's made with the intention of being a game, and most importantly, if it is in the context of a game, then it's as good as a game. And you know, our games are going on itch and Steam, where games are sold, plus some other things. But fundamentally, like, it's an interactive bit of software that is for let's say, entertainment purposes. And it walks like a game, it talks like a game. Maybe it's not overly gamey, it's not the strongest example of a game, it's not your Socratic kind of ideal of a game, but I think it's so close that it does. I think the distinction probably doesn't matter.
I'm more interested in genres and subgenres. I think we're not really trying hard enough in the same way we have in music to actually define how games are categorized into subgenres. Like right now, if I put up a game on Steam, every single game we make comes under the category adventure, and there is
story rich.
Yeah, there is no like good word to describe the stuff we're making, and visual novel is the closest. But there was a lot of arguments going on Twitter recently about how visual novel is a dirty word in the Western culture, and that like technically Mass Effect is a visual novel, but no one wants to pretend it's not, and no one wants to believe it is because it's considered dirty.
Yeah.
And so it is an interactive fiction, or it is story rich, which I think is
I understand y'all's frustration, and I thought that this would be the response to that question specifically. I still think it's something that worth like discussing long term for this medium, because this medium is still relatively young, kind of in its infancy, so to speak. Definitely compared to other forms of art and entertainment. And I think as much as it's important to maybe to create new labels or to defy labels, it does help to kind of get a better understanding of kind of the experiences that people are having. I guess maybe it is a bit too shallow just to be like game or not, because oftentimes people are dismissive, and I get that frustration because you don't want a situation where people are like, well, it's not really a game, and then they just kind of like put it in its own separate box. But I think that whole idea, even to Tony, to your point, you did say like interactive, and I think there is an expectation. So kind of to play devil's advocate here for a moment is, we have been playing a lot of these kind of labeled visual novels as part of our series, and there are questions about like the levels of interactivity. In fact, you'll notice that even week to week we've had usually at least one type of game of this category on, and there's been kind of a mixed reaction. Some people are saying, well, it's not interactive enough for my tastes. Or I guess I should say, one of the strengths of this medium is the ability to interact. And so I guess what I'm asking here is, to me, it seems still like a fair criticism that people can level and say, like, that there's maybe not a cartoonish like expectation of like pure being able to just like hero fantasy with the child or the fisherman or all that. But a type of level of interactivity is kind of expected, so to speak, in this medium. So I guess, how do you all respond to that? And then I promise the next thing we're going to do is talk about the camera controls as part of the interaction, because I know Amar's been holding on to that question, and I know we've been going over time, so I hope you guys are still okay for
I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good.
This is great.
I'm gonna take a 30-second break, if that's okay.
Okay.
Respond to Lou, is that all right?
Please go for it. Absolutely.
Richard, you take the question.
Okay, so I think what's interesting to talk about here is, Tony could talk about this better, but how linear our games are. Like traditionally, if you were to come across them, you would think it's very linear. There's no exponential branching. You don't end up with like 10 different outcomes. And there's a sense from some players that makes it less of a game. But I mean, if you were like the primary point is for us to tell a good story.
Yes.
And if we think that having multiple choices is going to give you a better story, then yeah, we'll probably do it. But it's a way up between telling the author's story that we want to create, how much time we want to spend on it, and like giving you the sense of agency that you have control over the story. Because there are plenty of interactive fictions out there that branch like spiders' webs into thousands of different multiple endings, but if they don't communicate the choice properly as being a real choice as being having like actual impact on the story, and it doesn't tell you that something has happened and you have branched, then you won't notice it, and so it might as well be a linear story. But you may end up ending the game early, or you may end up with a result that you don't really feel completely happy with.
Yeah.
It is like writing a branching story is no harder or easier than writing a linear story. It's the way you want to approach creating that particular game.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because I think that's important to state, that you guys obviously had a defined experience you wanted to convey, and you delivered it in this fashion. And not every experience requires, to reference the last few sentences we were saying with this conversation, not everything requires like you have to have this level of interaction, or you have to deliver the experience this way. So I really love and appreciate what you all are doing there. I will ask one more thing about that before we we get quite a few of these questions and comments in here, is and thank you Bardbastic for the subscription. Thank you so much, we really appreciate that. Thank you Bardbastic, an MVP in the Potions and Pixels community. Really appreciate that. You are the man for sure. Thank you. To that question, what can I ask you all? What are the benefits in your mind of making this a game versus simply an animated short? Like, what to you is the actual difference that the player is experiencing, and why did you choose to deliver it through the interactive game medium versus just simply uploading this as a video built in Unity, for example?
Well, we have actually considered the option several times of just uploading it as a video built in Unity, or just like recording a canon playthrough that we just do or something. But so I think there's a bunch of like arty reasons that we could give, like the interactivity is somehow better for engendering like empathy in the player or something, because it's forcing you to actually make that choice. And there's been counter arguments to that, but I do still buy into it. I think that's the case. Like I think it is more compelling to have to choose between like ethical things that you're invested in a game yourself than watch a character do it, for the most part. Watch a character do it that you're not controlling, for the most part. But then there's also other things, like there is no financially sound market for short film.
No.
It doesn't exist. So if you want to do that, you need to make it interactive and make it into short game experiences. And even then, there's not really much of a viable market. We're working on it, but there's not much. But it's more viable. People are more likely to be exposed to that. Like when people go to the cinema or go on Amazon to like watch a premiere of a film or something, those are very, I guess, Hollywood's equivalent of AAA spaces. And you don't get indie films running, like I'm talking short films, student projects, also running in the cinema. But Steam, you do get those things. You can have our game side by side with an Ubisoft Watch Dogs game or something. That they can coexist and both present their value side by side. So I think it's more possible in games. Also, not artistically interesting, but we really like games. And so we're making games, and so if we want to say something, then it's going to be told through the game format, in the best way that the game format can do it, that we can think of. And that's it. So there's real dumb answers to that question, but like
I've got one extra point.
Please, Richard.
If you're making a 5-minute short, that would take you 6 months or so to fully model, rig, animate everything, render and light. But we can make 5-minute shorts that are really just 30 seconds of actual content, but spread out with other things like the text or the
Yeah.
interaction. And so the actual work effort there gets stretched out and can go further and can give you more content for the amount of time we put in, which is really the way we're able to produce so many games in a year, whereas we may only otherwise have produced like, I don't know, 6 30-second shorts or something on YouTube, which is completely unmonetizable.
Yeah, I love this, and I think again, just to reiterate, I think all of us, those who are watching or who are hoping with Indie Game Club and through some of the conversations we're having, people kind of expand their scope of what gaming interactivity has to offer. And may experience things like these games that you guys have created that they may not have known ahead of time. We've gotten quite a few messages from folks who have told us like, hey, that we're so glad we were able to tune in and discover these games because this wasn't necessarily on our radar ahead of time, and expanding people's views of interactivity. I mean, we reference Bandersnatch, for example, on Netflix, this whole idea that people want to kind of have some level of agency, want to jump into the story, and to your points about empathy and sympathy, like the components there of being within the specific character roles. We have Omar saying, you can learn more from this game than reading all the news out, teaches sympathy via games. And Tempest 636, I think this might have been referencing Mass Effect. To Richard's point, he says it has RPG shooter mechanics and visual novel mechanics. True. Amar saying it's hard to market it without giving a point of reference. Let's go back to Amar's earlier question that he had quite a bit earlier here about the camera controls, because this is one of the areas of interaction. He said, can they go into the camera views? There are no camera options to show all characters, and I feel like having them sitting on two sides was a cool intentional or non-intentional move. And he says again that he wanted to just understand how you guys chose which ones to show at any given time, or to allow the player to choose. Any thoughts about that? What were the camera controls?
Do you want to talk about the choices between Night Fisherman and Outcast Lovers, and then I'll talk about like how the mechanic was conceived of?
Sure. Because I can't remember how the mechanic was conceived.
Okay.
But,
Perfect.
yeah. So like first of all, I should preface this with like the mechanic is not good. I feel like it's effective. Obviously, we've done it for a reason, but like, you know, trying to make decisions with the mouse while also us needing you to use the arrow keys and stuff, like the UX is bad, and we're designing better ways to tackle it. But in terms of the choices that get made, so in the Night Fisherman, it was very simple. I just took, I studied the cinematography of the Inglourious Basterds scene, and I looked at what camera heights they were using and what closenesses they were using, and I decided to have 5 simple cameras. So there would be a duo shot, and then a medium over the shoulder on each of the characters from behind the other, and then a close-up of each of the characters. The decisions to like change the camera and force the camera changes are mostly to draw your attention to a new thing that's occurring. That's exclusively what it is in Night Fisherman. And it's to draw your attention to the boy in the back of the boat. Some people don't notice him the first time it changes the camera because they're focusing on the text and not studying the details, and it's quite dark and everything. The intention was there to like sort of mirror the view of the Jews under the floorboards in the film, but it's a very different shot.
Yeah.
But then after releasing The Night Fisherman, we noticed that there were a bunch of people who were choosing to opt out of the mechanic by just sitting on the duo shot. And they felt safest there because they felt most in control, because they could see both boats, they could see both men, and they could just sit there and watch. And if the camera moved away from that at any point to cut away to the boy in the boat or anything, they were hammering the keys until they could get back to that shot that made them feel safer.
I might have done that myself, I think.
Yeah. So when it came to Outcast Lovers, I thought, what experience do I want to create here? Do I want to allow the player to not engage with the mechanic? Preferably not. But do I want them to have a safe zone where they feel more comfortable? No, I don't. So the decision was made there. There is a camera in the game that we could have implemented. It's ready to go. And that does happen at some point in the logic flow when you're first introduced to the scene, where you see the whole scene to establish it, and you've got the two women on both sides of the table and the boy there as well. But I don't allow you to use that in the rotation of cameras that the player can control, because I don't want you to have that respite, basically. Like, you always can't see at least one character as things are going around. And like, as in Outcast Lovers, there are men approaching over one of the characters' shoulders through. You can see it through a window. They're outside the building. You can only see that from the one specific camera angle. So, and that camera angle, other than that, only features one of the characters. So, if you want to see the other characters, anyone who's not Ola, the one you're playing, you have to be looking away from what the men outside are doing. So it creates a sense of unease. Which I think was successful. I like that about the game. The thing that was unsuccessful about it is that there are people who felt who just couldn't cognitively engage with both things at the same time, and found it very confusing. So I think in the future we're going to try to include a version where the camera changes maybe naturally as it would in a film, unless you have been engaging with the mechanic. But if you don't engage with it for a couple of scripted camera changes, then it will go back to, or maybe it will just be a director mode versus a cinema mode or something. That's less elegant, and I don't think I want to do that. But
I want to say I've seen a few games that have done that. None immediately come to mind, but they have the kind of I'll have to go back into my mental archive and try to see what games have done those type of camera controls.
We didn't pull that idea specifically from any game, I don't think. It came from Ring of Fire because we had the ability to look around the room. We like that we can author basically a background once and then use it multiple times for different shots.
Yeah.
So like the master shot will be the idea that is concepted and painted, but then the other shots are just close-ups. I think it's most closely tied to Subsurface series. The Circular series, and but they didn't do it quite the same way as us. They didn't give the player control. It was just an authored part of the narrative, I think. So where the idea came from, or actually, there's only one time in the narrative that the game wrestles control over the camera away from you. Is that right, Tony? In both games, and it's to do a reveal.
Yes and no. There's more in the second one. In the Outcast Lovers, there was right before we were shipping it, there was like some issues that we encountered with the thugs approaching outside. I keep calling them thugs because that's what they're called in the like asset thing that we imported.
These are,
but
assuming EPG
the officers,
members.
They're actually from Immigration Enforcement.
These are them. Oh yeah, okay, that's right.
Government agency. But the officers are approaching outside, and there's bits where, because we don't have any idea how long it's going to take the player to read a given section, particularly people with English as a second language. It's really difficult to time their approach. So there happens. So basically, there's an overly complicated system where there's like various waypoints that they're moving towards, but at certain points, we need them if they have not already reached there to jump forwards. So and there was, I couldn't think, because I'm a bad programmer, of any good way of doing this. So literally, they just get moved, like shunted forwards, and the camera cuts just as that is about to happen, so that the player can't ever see them like just jump forwards by 20 meters in a single frame. And that's it. It's as dumb as that.
Got it.
But generally speaking, other than to hide something, it's to show you something that it gets used, and it's just for reveals.
And I like the fact that it felt like we kind of discussed this in our indie game club discussion, where in this situation, even though you're choosing the dialogue with the limited interactivity, it feels like an area that you can control and hold on to, and so it kind of encourages the player to control the camera even more so. And so I think that's also something, going back to the component about discussing levels of interactivity, is you can actually stress certain types of interactivity by limiting others. So I found that a fascinating component as well.
Where that actually originally came from, I've remembered it now. The very first nugget of a reason why the camera mechanic made it in there was literally, we had a short conversation about, okay, how do we make this more interesting so the player has something to do with their hands? And I threw the idea out. I have no idea where it came from. There wasn't any particular one thing, but I just wanted to author some camera angles that looked nice. And I was like, what if we let them direct it? I'll just change the camera. I remember at first Richard was like, but what's the point? It's not serving anything. And we still probably have to ask ourselves that. But that's where it came from. And I started playing with it. And we demoed it to some peers where I was like, we were on like a Zoom thing. And I was showing them what happened in the game. And it was like 2 days into the prototype, very, very early. But I really enjoyed presenting, like streaming it to them and choosing the camera angles on purpose to tell the story my way.
Yeah, I love
it. So the whole thing kind of built out from there. I think that both those games are actually best played to an audience. And this is something I like about it, because I often play games and my wife will be in the room like watching or doing something else, but passively kind of watching. And if things get interesting, will be, attention on the TV. So I like things that you can present it in your way.
Let me ask you guys.
You spent a lot of time on the Tsushima photo mode as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I do that in all the games, all the like big AAA games that I end up playing. I always spend loads of times in the photo.
Yeah,
like
framing a scene. Yeah, I love
sometimes more than I do just playing.
Interesting.
It's good.
So where the camera mechanic originally came from. So I will preface this with both me and Tony, me more so, are not very good programmers. I'm an animator artist, and Tony is a writer, designer. And so I was given the task of creating the fishing mechanic for the Night Fisherman in the first instance in the prototype week. And I tried my best. But having actual fishing experience, I really struggled to take that idea and convey it mechanically. I was going too far down the route of trying to simulate how a fishing lure would sink and rise and sink and rise, so that you could idly fuss around with something fishing rod while you were reading the text. I wanted that
the original idea of something to fiddle with.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wanted that contrast of something to fiddle with, something to do with your hands, which is why I think the camera controls are on the left and right arrow, and the up and down arrows are reserved for the fishing mechanics.
Gotcha. Okay, so that was the original decision. Yeah,
may come back at some point, I hope, but I don't think they will. And so at the last minute, we made the decision to cut fishing. This was like, I don't know, day before the end of the week or something. We're like, it's not happening. Kill it. We're like, okay, well, what's left? And the only other thing we had left in the game, apart from text, is we have this tool called Cinemachine, which is owned by Unity, and it lets you swap the cameras around, which we tend to do through the narrative. But I think Tony had the idea of just attaching it to some keys, and then I created the logic of bouncing around sort of in a star shape between them, and then arriving on a hidden camera as part of that. But I would love to extend it and assign them to like numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something, because at the moment, it's accessible to push between them, but if you're actually trying to present it like you're a YouTube player or something, you end up with these like weird half shots in between your cuts
as you're like trying to
Yeah.
rapidly jump across. Yeah.
Interesting stuff there.
But
Yeah,
I wish we'd actually designed a real directing mode.
well, it makes me
and I wish-
curious about future work that you guys will produce. A lot of this stuff, it's going to be great to like look back at this conversation once you guys are down the road with more, and just see all the changes that you will all implement here. John O'Reilly saying it's nearly tea time in the UK. Can't interrupt tea time, so we apologize to those in the UK as well as Tony or Richard. I don't know how my aunt lives in the UK, and I don't know. I've been a few times, but I don't know how much the tea time is religiously observed right now these days. So apologies if we are interrupting your cultural traditions there.
Big shout out to John as well. Much love.
Awesome. Shout
he's
out
a
to
friend.
John. Fantastic. Thank you, John. I got a couple quick questions on this. I'm laughing because, when we originally set this up, I was like, hopefully we can do this all in an hour. But knowing myself and knowing this format, I just get too into it. So I appreciate you guys still sticking around, because we still have a little bit more to go with the Imagined Leviathan, Ring of Fire.
I talk a lot.
Well, and it's all good. Let me know if anything, and John sending his love. Thanks, John. But a couple quick turbo questions, I guess, before we move on to Imagined Leviathan. Overall, do you guys like the idea when you said that you see like people streaming this and sharing the experience? Do you guys like the idea of streamers reading the dialogue or not?
Yes.
Yes?
Love it.
Richard? Tony?
It depends how well it's done.
Yeah.
I've seen some, and it's been brilliant, and I've really enjoyed it. Weirdly, more frequently by people who don't speak English as a first language.
Interesting.
But then some other ones are like maybe tonally inappropriate for the game. And that's partly our fault for like not being fully upfront about what the content's going to be. But it's funny, like I'm thinking of some specific YouTube playthroughs where the person starts off going like, "I'm Turtle with the EPG," and like being very joking, and then all of a sudden, like he's pointing a gun at a child, and
and then by the end of it,
holy shit!
Yeah, exactly.
And you see people's faces kind of fall, which is itself entertaining. So.
I think that's what happened with mine. I think Omar mentioned that on that. That was just my eyes and face turned red, and I think that's the tricky part. When I was playing Wide Ocean Big Jacket, I was able to like get the characters like speak it like in a way where I feel like I could provide some sort of like entertaining stream. But for this one, I don't know if I did the best job, because it's just like even once you start digging in a little deeper and you know what kind of content you guys at Far Few Giants produce, it's like, I don't want to make any jokes or like anything. I'm just gonna be it's hard to know how to. So I was curious what you thought about that.
It's interesting, like when they finish playing and they have like a few minutes to do a wrap up, that not a lot of people would actually sit down and consider what the themes were and what it meant, because they're thinking a lot about how their audience is going to take it, and they don't want to politically divide their audience when they're only just starting off a YouTube channel or something.
We definitely scare people occasionally.
Yeah,
it's always bizarre to me, because like people finish the game and they'll have made some interesting comments as they play through it. They'll get to the end of the game and they'll go, "Whoa, well guys, like and subscribe."
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no, but I want to hear your thoughts. Like if I'm watching you play, surely I want to hear your thoughts. I'm here for you. So like, tell me how it made you feel. But maybe that's just because I made the game. But I feel like it would be more entertaining just as a viewer. Maybe I'd watch more YouTube playthroughs and stuff if that was more of the done thing. People actually like analyze the way things made them feel.
And that's what we're going with this program as well. We wanted to have these more in-depth discussions. I personally, it's interesting. I spent the last decade or more of my life as a community organizer working in the nonprofit front. So I've always had, in the community here, I'm either known as like the game guy or the activist guy, depending on the circles I'm in, because of my long history in both. And so this was kind of a perfect opportunity, as someone who's worked primarily on environmental issues, but immigration and a whole host of things. To me, this was kind of a great I think this is one of the reasons why I gravitated towards this content. I think in this day and age, when more people are waking up, so to speak, to a lot of these issues through various means, I think I can only imagine that this content will become more and more appealing.
Michael, now I want to interview you.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question as
Like,
well.
I didn't know that was your history. Like, I want to know. Maybe it's not the venue, but I want to know.
Yeah, deeply involved in activism. You can, I guess, Google my name if you can spell it. I'll send it to you guys afterward. But yeah, very involved in a wide variety of things. I used to work for a sustainability organization here. Before that, I spent years at Greenpeace. I was I guess really heavily involved in the Occupy movement, Moral Monday movement. I've been involved in local and state level politics for about a decade or so. So a lot of activism and working on labor issues, environmental issues, you name it. I've kind of a lot of these things kind of are so intertwined that the nature of organizing has required us to. It encouraged us to realize that we need to work with people who are experiencing struggles that are all intertwined, or oftentimes we hear the term intersectional. So yeah, this is kind of near and dear to me in that regard. And also why I think maybe my interpretation of the Imagined Leviathan was what it was. And after last night's show, I actually played it all again, and I think I went even deeper into that interpretation.
That was a beautifully done segue there, Michael.
Yes, I did. I'm trying. These are like my new tactics here. So if you guys don't mind, let's check out the trailer for the Imagined Leviathan, and then we can jump into that. So this is the Imagined Leviathan.
"50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable. And that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature, and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold. And from there on it did not lead him to the conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe."
So that was a bit from the Imagined Leviathan, the latest game from our friends here at Far Few Giants. This game is a bit different in some ways. In some ways, it's not. I think it has the in what it shares is this beautiful contrasted colored look. Some of the narrative delivery, but in some ways it's not, because this is in comparison to the previous two games we discussed, this one actually has you more in full control. There can be an end state. How would you all describe this game to those who are just watching this right now?
It is more so a game than our previous games.
It's first of all a survival game that has one single stat essentially to manage. So you're freezing to death, and you need to not freeze to death. It's like minus 50 degrees. It is set in a near future version of Britain, where basically a day after tomorrow style climate catastrophe has occurred, and everything's covered in a meter or so of snow. It's like another ice age. And you can't thrive in this game. Like it's just about survival. Like, can you get to the next set of resources? Then there's also the layer of like, I guess you've got your permadeath from the survival. You've got your poetry from these audio logs that occur. That if anyone's played The Witness, it's sort of similar to the audio diary things that you gather in that game, but a bit more ghosty. And it also has horror elements to it that people don't always notice because they're very subtle. That's it, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of a walking simulator with survival elements, really stripped down survival elements.
I've got somewhere on my desk. Here we go.
Oh yeah.
A slow-paced, poetic, visually stunning trip through climate-ravaged Britain. That's how somebody described it to us.
Okay, and so that immediately gets me excited to discuss this, because I don't know if I saw ahead of time. I don't think in y'all's description it has the overt reference to climate change or things like that. So, so that was my kind of interpretation, and I guess it's more than that, because there are those specific quotes, and we should say the voice you hear here in the game, if it's not immediately apparent, is the voice of Tony here. And so there's some of these sections, and we should give a shout out to Amar as well. If you watched last night, he was saying this reminds me of the To Build a Fire by Jack London, and then immediately we brought that up as well.
If you saw our pitch presentation, that is one of the first references.
I love it.
I have a screenshot of To Build a Fire by Jack London, and I played a shit ton of The Long Dark, and I love their like hardcore survival mode in that, called Interloper. I got really, really into it a couple of years ago. It kind of helped me out of a dark place. It kind of gave me something to focus on when I was not in a good way, and I wanted to capture that feeling, but I wanted to do it in a really simplistic, like focused way. And when I was looking at our inspirations to build a fire, there's a really beautiful animated short on Vimeo which recreated that story, and I originally just wanted to turn that into a game and just focus on building the fire falling over, you becoming progressively less and less resources, till you're just burning a box of matchsticks and trying to prevent your fingers from freezing off you, that sort of thing. We didn't quite nail that, but that was the intention, and I feel like in future
We didn't
iterations,
simulate those things, but I feel like we came close to the like evoking the feeling. If that makes sense.
Yeah, especially with the whole component about, which I didn't immediately understand, I should say, on my kind of my first playthrough, the whole idea, I kind of got it, but not quite, the whole idea that you have essentially, so for those who are watching, when you're constructing these fires, part of it is you need life, which is essentially kind of the text that you find, these kind of quotes and narrative tidbits, and part of that is actually you kind of have these choices of destroying life in order to warm yourself, or destroying this kind of these narrative pieces to keep yourself alive, because you can die in this game. And so I think that is kind of interesting too, and giving the players, I guess, a bit of choice over what was the idea behind that. Did you guys want like it to be like, oh, I don't want to get, it pains me to have to get rid of like elements of the narrative, so you're sacrificing potential story in an effort to save yourself, which kind of goes, Richard, towards your point about limited resources, surviving.
Yeah, there was a strong focus on not having the thrive aspect of survive and thrive you get in survival games, where we didn't want to give you an infinite backpack. We didn't want to give you the ability to manage your inventory. I actually, the way the text is implemented at the moment is not my ideal situation. It's like it is one layer abstracted from the simulation. And yeah, it comes down to Tony. You wrote the mechanic. You probably have a better understanding of it.
The idea, which was not perfectly executed, but the idea was to have this layer of selection. So when I played The Witness, I really loved that it acted as this litmus test for myself, basically, where as I was going through passively listening to these wildly different philosophical positions, or just moral, ethical positions, some of them I wasn't focusing on them, but I would naturally find myself nodding along and agreeing with, and then other ones I'd find myself just no, I disagree. Like basically anytime there was some
in my example, the like religious theologist philosophy stuff in there, I was like, this isn't for me. But when it was like, the Confucian stuff, I was agreeing with it. And I wanted to have a similar thing, but also, but like mechanize that. So the player would be gathering these different little tidbits of story or poetic readings, and they would want to hold on to whichever one they felt was most important, that they agreed with the most, that they connected with the most. So there'd be a process of elimination by which at the end of the game, when you reach this monolith that you're supposed to inscribe something for future generations on, you have held on to the one that you felt you connected to the most, and then you inscribe it there for future generations. So you were supposed to learn a little bit about yourself, I guess, by playing the game, by being presented with these different existential crises, and seeing which one it was that you felt was most important to communicate, and to keep hold of the warning against. But because the fire building mechanic was not the clearest in the launch day version, which we're patching like tomorrow, I think, people got a little bit confused and then ended up like burning a load of things that they didn't necessarily want to. So the choice wasn't being so conscious. They were more getting like just the version of it that was in the witness, where they just experienced these things.
Gotcha.
And then responded to it, but they weren't necessarily like, by process of elimination, working out which one they cared about the most. I think a reasonable number of people came to understand how the mechanic was working on extra playthroughs. The game generally requires restarting quite a few times to actually reach the end, because it's challenging. So I think there was a number of people who got it, but I don't know if it was the majority. I think most people kind of like got to that final choice and were like, I don't know which one's the most interesting. Maybe I haven't even listened to this one yet. I'm just going to put this one on there. Sure. And then you kind of get an ending and that's it. And maybe you think about it a bit, but it's not like you maybe haven't got what I wanted, which is that you learn something about yourself.
Yeah. Let's talk about that specific piece. This fascinated me on so many levels, and I want to dig a bit deeper into that. So I mentioned this briefly on our Let's Discuss episode yesterday, and I honestly wish we had more time on that because there were so many other elements I really wanted to dig deeper into. But you mentioned at the top of this specific, talking specifically about the Imagined Levithan, that the climate change component, it felt like very much that as you're experiencing this, you're experiencing the aftermath, this post-human world that is suffering under the consequences of an exploitation of people and the planet that occurred beforehand. And there's a lot of reflection of this. I'm wondering, as far as like the choice of the Leviathan itself. So my interpretation of that was this Leviathan is that especially when you're saying the Imagined Leviathan, it's just one of these things that currently, as we speak, we're all going through a worldwide pandemic. We're still experiencing climate change. We are still experiencing exploitation of human beings across this planet, and yet there isn't the willingness to act that there needs to be in order to counteract and move in an entirely different direction. So I'm just curious about that Leviathan piece, the kind of the Cthulhu-esque creature.
Before you move past that, I really want to hear, what is your definition for what the Imagined Leviathan is? Just for my own benefit, I want to hear.
Yeah, and it's probably one of those things that I'm going to need to play a bit more to be satisfied myself with that interpretation. But the Imagined Leviathan, to me, and I'm starting to hesitate now. You're getting nervous. You're called upon by the teacher or the authors themselves. But to me, it almost felt like the Imagined Leviathan was the looming end of us, so to speak. That we it's there if you want to see it. And there is a significant portion of the public that chooses to either actively not want to see it or kind of takes an ignorance is bliss mentality, whatever it may be, or embraces ignorance to the point where they're wrapped around in conspiracy. So that was my interpretation of the Imagined Leviathan, that it's clear if you actually wanted to take the time and look, that it is something has a looming presence over us. But yeah, how did I do, teachers?
10 out of 10.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Hey, okay, that feels great.
So, the intention is that this is not an original concept. It's something that I took from Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. He introduces the concept in this one metaphor of the Imagined Leviathan, which we then expanded into basically the whole game, the whole game's text and subtext, which is that Imagined Leviathan is something that is so overwhelming to think about, such a huge existential threat, or just so outscaled compared to yourself, that your mind can't look at it. Like, you can't think about it and actually address that in the forefront of your mind, of your brain.
Yeah.
Not for long anyway. Otherwise you would go insane, and people do. People get, like, when I say insane, people, have psychotic breaks. People get incredibly depressed when they really sit with and think about constantly the reality of the situation that we're all in. And so, yeah, as you say, people ignore it and will embrace ignorance as a virtue and that kind of thing. So the society that we present in the game, where they're going to the Steelhenge and inscribing messages, a warning of things that we didn't think about, that were our Leviathans in the past, is trying to... They're trying to enshrine in tradition introspective time to actually think about the existential threats. Like, to sit and think, are there any Leviathans I'm currently avoiding thinking about? For whichever people come after the person that you're playing as in the game. But it's not just a climate change. So it started with climate change. The game in its first iteration was just about the looming threat of climate change. But then when we came round to the second iteration, that felt shallow. Like, just having all the quotes be about how cold it was and that sort of thing felt like it was kind of missing the point. And the real thing I wanted to do, which is encourage people to think about those things that are going on in the back of your mind that you just cannot sit with and really consider. It meant that I had to basically take a piece of paper and write out every existential crisis I've ever had, which you can probably tell by the way I speak is numerous. So, like, I'm at my desk at the moment. Here we go.
I remember you telling me about that, and it was a hard day for you.
Oh, wow.
This was my detailing of all the existential crises.
Yeah. And I think upon repeated playthroughs, I was able to kind of see that with the exploitation of people, the whole idea. I guess it almost feels like there's almost like a guilt as well about the gaming component, or at least escaping into games, and that games themselves could be potentially responsible for exploitation as well.
When you write, I tend to find that you discover things about yourself that bubble up through the writing that you didn't know was something that was going to be there. You didn't know it was something that was bugging you and in the subconscious of your mind. So that definitely happened with this, in exactly the point that you just made, where I'd like fetched a bit on Twitter about like the paradox of like being concerned about all these massive things and existential threats that could destroy humanity and are destroying humanity. While also like spending my time making entertainment software very inefficiently. But I wasn't thinking about that going into this. So I was like, talking about the desire to live ethically, about climate change, about the fact that death can occur at any moment, about the hundreds of millions of people that are starving right now, and simulation theory and the Fermi paradox. And not all of these things necessarily made it in. But it started to become a common thread, and that's when, to me, these were not the same character when I started. But then as I started putting, actually like writing the things that I was going to record, it became obvious that actually they were the same character, and it was just basically a fictionalized version of myself. It's not me, but like it's my shit that's coming through. So yeah, there's definitely guilt in there about spending my time on something that's ultimately frivolous. There's a couple of them, and also like the conspiracy theory one is probably like one of my favorites, because I think lots of people aren't expecting to hear it go quite so batshit. Like it's very, very serious, and the other quotes are very serious. And then next to a 5G tower, you find like this one quote that is about how like lizard people run the world and stuff, and they're descended from ancient Mayans or something. Yeah.
You also from the UK, right?
Yeah. But like, you know, I've been there. Like I've got so depressed and so incapable of handling the world that I wanted to see some kind of order desperately enough, and to feel special desperately enough, that I bought into conspiracies at one point in my life. And so yeah, I don't know. This is a bit of a ramble now.
No, I mean, this part hit me like kind of especially hard because as I kind of, you know, I tend not to in these interviews kind of bring my own personal background in here, but
no, do it. I demand it.
Okay. Well, you know, I mean, that's the interesting thing is all my life I wanted to be involved in the game industry. My father was a computer science professor, came to the United States. Like it was just something, a dream I had my entire life. And in end of high school, towards the end of high school, college, my father unexpectedly died just out of the blue, which deeply affected me in a way that probably kind of launched me on this path, which I can share many of your thoughts on trying to live an ideal lifestyle from a moral standpoint. In fact, I probably took it as extreme as like your average person can truly go. So it changed I've been a vegan most of my life. You know, I don't have a car myself. We have one for the family. The nature of Charlotte almost requires it, but I gave up on it. You know, all my clothes were secondhand. I even went to do projects where I went to Nicaragua to visit factories there to make sure the clothing was, you know, sweatshop free. And I wrote about these things, worked on these things, worked on climate change issues, arrested many times for activism, disrupted many of a shareholders meeting. You know, like this was my life, and I embraced this.
You're my hero, man. Like, fuck.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, but what you said there, it's like, it's interesting to me because like I felt so strongly that as much as I loved games, I needed to be doing something more meaningful, so to speak. And yet I've completely, I'm embracing you know, with Potions and Mixels being a nonprofit, we do a lot of our primary work is in the community. Like we do, you know, we teach people electrical skills, like working on arcade machines so they can get jobs as electricians. We help with that stuff. We help with like youth programs. We work with government. So we do a lot of these things to help. And I've found that these combinations of what you all are doing, I guess what I'm trying to do is address your kind of existential concern, because I honestly, I genuinely am saying this not just to kind of alleviate any concerns you all have personally about this, because it seems like a big thing. You're a Leviathan looming over your mind, but I genuinely think the work that you all are doing is incredibly important in reaching an audience. And it's a testament. I think the fact that there's not much of this type of art out there, interactive art of this type that is out there, that needs to be out there, that this is the exact type of stuff I want to see. I don't think it's necessarily one of those things of necessarily fully retreating into one of those worlds. I've kind of found, maybe after having children, maybe after just in my 30s now, but this is exactly the type of stuff I personally am looking for. And I think it allows people to understand themselves in the environment in a way to where you can make subtle changes in your life, you know, subtle changes to... I'm a big fan of what you said. Our everyday decisions kind of not only define us, but define the world we live in. So making sure that the products you're purchasing are not contributing to exploitation the best we can, because it can. In my case, when you talked about the conspiracy road, I kind of went to a place where I was deeply depressed because, you know, I couldn't even look up like where was this pen manufactured that I'm purchasing, you know, to the point of such extreme asceticism or giving up like trying to give up as many of my material possessions as possible in order to truly try to avoid this, the Leviathan. So I just wanted to, that's my little rant for the moment, to really say how much I appreciate what you all are doing here, and the fact that you all are tackling this subject matter when you guys could easily cover your standard AAA fare and probably be financially better off, but you all clearly have a message you want to say, and I, for one, and I believe our audience as well, just thanks you all for your work and appreciates it so much.
Thank you very much for saying that. It means a lot to hear.
Yeah.
Hopefully it reaches more people, and we can do it sustainably and like encourage other people to do the same thing. We're working on trying to with a couple of other creators at the moment on something that I don't want to spoil because it's not really my place, but like we're trying to popularize the short game format basically, so that this kind of work can be done. But part of that means not just changing how platforms serve up this work or make it financially viable in that way. Like you got to actually demonstrate value and go to people where they are and try and like change audience behaviors so that people are playing this kind of stuff rather than sinking their 7,000 hour into Dota or something. Which is fine as escapism, and I mean, the society we live in, it's impossible to be 100% ethical, and sometimes you just need to rest, and it's fine to like play games like that. But I feel like really it should be balanced with something maybe more nourishing.
Totally agree.
Personally, and maybe I sound like a massive twat, but
no, it's true, and we need a kind of a cultural shift in terms of just what we. I think the initial reaction to a lot of this stuff kind of speaks volumes as well, in terms of people kind of going in blind, not knowing. We've been so conditioned on what to expect with games that when we are confronted with like a work of art like this that demands us to think and act differently, there might be like that moment of dissonance where people don't quite get what to do next, but hopefully they're intrigued enough to want to explore and dig in further. This has only been out for how, like a week or so?
A week.
A week. Okay.
Yeah. We it's currently in open beta. Like we have a couple of different phases of our month, so we tend to launch the version out of closed alpha into open beta, and then 2 weeks later we launch on Steam, which is the official launch. So hopefully by that time we would have seen a bunch of YouTube playthroughs, we would have had friends and family play through it, give us feedback. People would have found most of the glaring bugs, that sort of thing. And so
sorry, carry on.
When it comes out on Steam, it's like more of a solid thing.
Gotcha.
I was just going to say, this is also, we haven't talked about this, but it's been by far the most technically challenging of the projects that we've worked on.
I was going to say that.
Sure, that like, seems to be the case, with the amount
of
content.
The other ones, we they were intentionally designed, like I explained 2 hours ago, that it was supposed to just be like a 3D environment that was attractive and nice, but it was limited content. It wasn't going to take us months and months and months to build, and all the gameplay was in the text layer, so I could produce it very, very quickly and cheaply. But with this one, with it actually just being a survival game and the text, there's probably less than a page of text overall in the game. It's all to do with the presentation and the way you interact with it, and the survival mechanics and how they make you feel is way more technically challenging. We brought a programmer on board full time to help us do it over the last month, but even then, like it was super difficult. I'm very much looking forward to. I think next we're going to do another narrative game in the following on from Outcast Lovers in some way. So I'm really looking forward to going back into the comfort zone temporarily.
I want to ask you all about that, because just hearing everything you're saying makes me think I know the answer to this question. But it seems like you all are very committed to this one game a month schedule, and
as much as we can. Regardless, occasionally we run into speed bumps and stuff. We're trying to release something by the end of each month,
which I think is great. Limitations oftentimes breed great creativity, so I think that is great to hear. And also just challenging yourself to constantly produce, I think is wonderful. And I'm super excited to see, because every time we're getting something from you all, I gotta say I was a little disappointed. I think when I first messaged you guys were like, for the time, we're not gonna immediately continue the Outcast Lovers, and I was like, I was sweating a bit because I was like, does this mean we're still gonna get another game? Will it be kind of in the series? What's gonna happen next? And so when I saw, and I think you guys messaged me about this as well, to see that this game came out, I was super excited, and that's why we had to add it to the last week's episode to make sure. Or this week's episode, I should say, to discuss it. Can I ask you, we have one of our guests last night, Madam Funsize, Jessica, said that she wants to, she wanted to know, you guys might have seen this. Let's see, right here. She found
the scarecrow.
Yeah, she found something super fascinating that we were all interested in right here. So check this out. I'm sure you guys obviously know about this. I'm saying check it out as if you guys didn't know that this is in your game. But Jessica, I think, was the only one to like outright find this. I played multiple times and I didn't see this necessarily myself. So can you give us some insight into this, because Madam Funside is eagerly awaiting to kind of know. She says, "I want to know about the devil dude!" 3 exclamation points.
Okay, so I want to preface this. I know Richard wants to answer this question, but I want to just get in ahead here and say that in the last couple of days before we were ready to ship this to Itch, we realized there wasn't quite enough variety in the landscape. So while I was doing a load of other things, Richard just just went kind of wild and added loads of assets to the project. And I think it's great. It's come out really good.
Including the feather.
I have yes,
yes, I love the feather.
I have no idea why some of those things are there. So I'm just as eager to
This
hear
is the best answer possible. I love this. Richard,
right, so...
please solve the mystery for us.
I want the detailed lore of why that scarecrow is there.
Why the scarecrow is there. So
ad-lib it.
When you start the game and you go into the first copse of trees, there is a signpost that points either right or forwards. And the idea being, if you follow the path right, you follow the power lines, and you end up at the house. You end up doing a dog's leg over to the steel henge. However, if you just wander out into the void, you don't really know where you are. You don't know what you're going to encounter. It's inherently more scary, even though it is a straight shot from start to finish. And that kind of ties into the idea of it being a horror game. We wanted it to have elements of horror.
Sure.
Specifically, we wanted to invert the horror. We didn't want to make a dark game, but we wanted to include a lot of the ideas you see in horror genre, like the sound effects, the visuals that kind of make you doubt yourself. And if you travel in that vector, you will encounter a few different things. There is a giant skull buried deep in the snow that you can only make out that it's a skull from one specific direction. It's like, I don't know, 10 foot big. And then you can see these skeleton limbs branching off in different directions from that, and like fingers sticking out of the ground. So that is one of the horror aspects of it that you probably won't encounter because it's relatively hidden out in the fog.
And funny enough, Madam Funsize says she's found it both times. She said, "Scared the shit out of me when I saw this, plus the big thing above." LOL.
Yeah. So then, when you're wandering in that void area, there are these big blocks that just look like cylinders. They're actually haystacks, like hay bales, that you would see this time of year in the British countryside. And so you're in a field, and it just made sense to me to have a scarecrow, because I was planning to put crows in the game that follow you around, kind of like that film. I think it's Hitchcock, The Birds, and just have these crows harass you around the level, which is why there's crow feathers falling from the sky, which are actually quills. They're not feathers.
Okay, gotcha.
And
they are flammable, I guess, importantly.
Yeah. Tony did that. He was like, I don't want to carry around something that does nothing. Let's make it flammable.
I've been wrongly accused, actually. It was our programmer, John, who did that, but I took the credit.
It makes sense, and yeah, and so that's why it's there. I was planning to add more elements of like cultist decoration to the game. Like I was planning to have what's that film with like the little stick weavings,
Blair Witch
Project style, like the cultist witch style
things.
yeah, Wiccan statues and stuff. I got about halfway through that list of stuff, and I think someone just, because there was something interesting there, someone put a quote next to it. There's another 5 or 6 objects in the world. It's kind of like a virtual museum. Like you can see bits of my artwork scattered around, and someone may or may not have put a quote next to it. Like you may have encountered an orb on the hill. That was a specific piece of artwork.
I think the further you get away from the safe intended path, the more of like a psychoscape it becomes. Like on the standard path, it's all very like mundane. The things you find are like a car, signposts, 5G signal tower, the house, some benches, until you get to the Steelhenge thing. But it's like when you're out in the white, in the scariest part of the game, you can find those like weirder, bigger, more psychological threats, I guess.
Yeah, can we talk a bit about those threats? While we're doing this, I'm trying to find the name of a game that there's an element that reminds me of, and I'm hoping to do multitask here with
this.
this.
Is it the White Swan?
No, which is a great comparison as well, but it is
Swan, right?
Unfinished Swan.
Amnesia.
Yes. No, Amnesia is a great comparison as well. That's also one that was in my mind. Amnesia and Unfinished Swan, but there is a game that I should say. So we do events in Charlotte as well. We've hosted about like 400 or so gaming events over the last 4 years. A lot, mainly multiplayer, indie game focused. And there was a student-made game that has been wildly popular at our events. It's a multiplayer game that's in black and white, and it's not necessarily relevant from a gameplay standpoint whatsoever. But it's one of those things. You know how it is when the name of a game is on your mind. I'm sure I'll find it while we discuss it. But
so the black and white aesthetic, is that what you're interested in?
well, yes, because there's the parts where you see the creatures, which I wanted to ask about the creatures, and the only time you can actually see the creatures is when they cross over the trees or the shadows of the black aesthetic. And so there's a game that specifically focuses on that mechanic, where all the characters are either black or white. So yeah, I'm curious about that, and I know Tony, you gotta bounce here momentarily, so maybe we can show the Ring of Fire right after this and get some last closing thoughts.
Okay. So the black and white aesthetic came from Inktober. I made some 3D scenes that were black and white as part of 3D Tober, just because I could make them in an hour. It was super quick, and I really, really wanted to make a game that was based around that aesthetic. And then we sort of ideated the Imagined Levithan as a way to deliver it. I didn't actually, at the time, I didn't think that it would be possible to make a game with that aesthetic, but we kind of did it, and it's interesting. It's I think it's challenging for the survival genre. It's a really big step out, I think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the look there. For the sake of time, let's show the Ring of Fire teaser, alpha teaser video, and then let's briefly talk about that before y'all have to jump off. So this is Ring of Fire. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do that again. Ring of Fire. So that was Ring of Fire, which I absolutely love that trailer, and I really enjoyed playing the game. Tony, since you have to leave, maybe Richard, we can keep you for a few minutes afterward, or if you gotta jump as well, that's totally fine. I know I've grabbed you guys for far too long, so I apologize to your family and friends.
It's been my pleasure. I just I have to go help my friend move a fridge out of his house.
Okay, so. Got it. Well, can you, Tony, before you jump, can you tell us about Ring of Fire? Maybe next projects you all are working on as well, and maybe just some closing thoughts from you.
I would love it if the Outcast Lovers and Night Fisherman shared its world with Ring of Fire. I feel like it was built in a way that could definitely be possible. So maybe it's part of the same story. Ring of Fire is a detective game, like we mentioned earlier. I really, really love games that make me sit there, like Heaven's Vault or Her Story, with a physical pad of paper and actually make notes and work out for myself. Because when you do that, when you require like the person to do a little bit of cognitive work and to input their decisions with a very wide possibility space for what their input is, they feel so good when you actually crack it and solve it, and you're so much more invested. Like if it's LA Noire style, where it's like, do I think this person's lying? Yes or no? Maybe I'll delay. Like if I decide yes and I'm correct, it's like, well, there was a 1 in 4 chance, and for some reason, just because it's a single button press, I don't feel like I own that decision. It wasn't really me. But if like in Her Story, I've put like a reference to a man being present in a scene, and then like a separate reference to like I don't know, there was someone I was in love with or something. I could be like, oh, okay, wait a minute, did that person have a did that person have a were they having an affair? So you type in affair into the database, and suddenly you get a load of videos that refer to her having an affair, and it telling you that. That's not spoilers. I can't remember if it's in the game. Like that feels so good, that moment, and you get so invested in it. So what I wanted to do is produce that feeling of investigative, deductive, like joy and satisfaction at it actually being you that solved it, not your player avatar in a game. It's you, and I wanted to apply that to people investigating topics that I cared about. So it happens in a post-climate change world. This time it's a utopia that's successfully adapted to it. There's all sorts of stuff about identity politics in the game that is directly tied into how you solve cases, because people have different mask identities and all that kind of jazz. So yeah, at a roller coaster pace, that is my my top line most favorite things about Ring of Fire.
And so currently it says Ring of Fire we may see in 2021. How are you all feeling about that? Obviously, with coronavirus and so many other factors at play, and this release schedule that you guys have of another game every month.
So Ring of Fire, we, like we said before, we pitched it to publishers for
a random 2 hours 33:40 as well. Not even a clean.
Yeah, exactly. Do
you know when exactly?
Oh, you know what's funny? I think we're still on YouTube.
Okay.
On YouTube, we're still live apparently, so we're laughing here, and I think people, although YouTube is probably our smallest audience. Oh no, we're back on. Hey, we're back on Twitch, and I think we're back on Facebook.
Okay.
We shall see. Sorry, folks who are watching. Not exactly sure what happened there. Right towards the end of our conversation, we get disconnected. So let me. Oops. Give me 1 second here to try to get a few things back together. Yeah. So we are back on Twitch and on YouTube. I think we may be disconnected from Facebook, but that is what it is. Maybe we can just wrap up this final part here. Or what I might do, if you don't mind, Richard, is I might just disconnect this right here and then just start it up as a finishing thoughts titles, just so it's archived on Facebook as well.